We are here today speaking out against British banks such as Lloyds, Barclays, HSBC and many others.
For more than 60 years, Cuba has been faced with a crushing economic blockade enacted by the United States and adhered to globally.
It's the longest and most comprehensive set of sanctions in modern history. Its aim is to bring about hunger, desperation and overthrow of the government.
They're blocking transactions to and from Cuba, or even blocking international transactions that have any reference to Cuba. And these British banks, the banks that are on our high streets, are totally complicit in the illegal blockade.
The US will fine banks millions of dollars if they allow such transactions to be made. We have seen this happen to banks across Europe, including British banks such as HSBC in 2012, who faced a $600 million fine, with Barclays and Lloyds also paying hundreds of millions each in 2010.
They've frozen ticket sales from a classical music concert in London that was raising money to send a piano to Cuba. They've frozen Facebook pages, they've frozen PayPal accounts, Stripe accounts, raising money from humanitarian aid to Cuba. They've blocked transactions from solidarity groups to special funds and accounts set up to process donations for medical equipment and for the recovery after the fire last year.
The blockade has cost the Cuban people some $150 billion since its introduction in 1960. These are genocidal measures, depriving the Cuban people of basic necessities such as food, medicine, fuel and medical equipment.
Today, the blockade, coupled with global inflation and the impact of war in Ukraine, is really hurting Cuba. Blackouts, empty shelves, scarcity of basic goods and increasing prices are taking their toll. Unlike most countries, Cuba has no lender of last resort. It has no emergency funding to help it through crises.
This financial blockade by British banks in compliance with US sanctions breaks Britain's own laws. The 1980 Protection of Trading Interest Act makes it illegal for British companies to adhere to extraterritorial sanctions.
The US attempts to justify its illegal blockade with all sorts of spurious accusations against Cuba. Cuba remains on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism, supposedly for its role in the Colombian peace talks, something which is rejected by the Colombian government.
The US lists Cuba as a terrorist state, but is the other way around. Whilst Cuba is sending doctors around the world, the US is sending bombs.
Cuba has recently adopted a new family code, which represents the most progressive set of laws in the world regarding the status of the family and women's and LGBT rights. 6 million Cubans participated in the writing of the first draft of the code, which has advanced the interest of all Cuban people, including those previously oppressed and discriminated against.
Cuba shows us that it is possible to solve the problems created by capitalism in its drive for profits, that it is possible to provide everyone in the world with the essentials for a dignified life, even with limited material resources. We need the example of socialist Cuba now more than ever. But Cuba needs us.
British banks are complicit in enforcing the blockade, and it is up to us to show that we will not tolerate the banks doing so. And unless we act, the banks will continue to do this in our name. So we demand that British banks unblock Cuba and stop enforcing the illegal blockade.
It's time for direct action. Cuba solidarity groups are coming together to organise a broad campaign to challenge the banks. Through coordinated civil action, legal challenges and street protest, we intend to make the US blockade of Cuba unenforceable.
We can all do something to end the US blockade of Cuba. We can use our rights as people, as activists, as citizens, to demand that the banks comply with their own laws. We can build a solidarity movement with Cuba to demand an end to the US blockade. And you might think, why Cuba? Why is it important? As we look around Britain today, with more and more people dependent on food banks, more and more people struggling to keep a roof over their head, to put the heating on, and to put food on their table. Well, this is because Cuba shows us what is possible when an alternative system is built. One that puts people before profit, and one that puts people, not just in one country, above people around the world, but practices real internationalism.
In December of this year, our campaign in solidarity with Socialist Cuba, Rock Around the Blockade, we're sending a solidarity brigade to Cuba, sending a group of British young people to go and see the achievements of Cuban socialism, the challenges they're facing, restrictions and sanctions from the US blockade that has been uninterrupted since 1960.
We will be taking over medical equipment to a children's A&E department in Havana Hospital. We're raising funds for this here on the streets of Govan today. To find out more information, to donate, come and speak to us. Viva Cuba, end the US blockade. Tell the banks, unblock Cuba.
Unblock Cuba! Unblock Cuba! End the blockade!